This graph makes explicit what most Americans already know from their lived experiences. The country is increasingly becoming politically polarized, with the Democratic and Republican parties drifting apart ideologically. This next chart shows the twin phenomena, the increasing dislike for people in an opposing party, and this one shows that these attitudes are driving people into echo chambers where their political views are seldom challenged. These shifts are complex, but have been at least partially driven by the new digital media landscapes, which encourage catchy slogans and memeable images over nuanced discussion of complex political issues. I am among a growing number of Americans who believe that true political change and social cohesion requires resisting this divisive status quo. I created this series of illustrations to advocate for civil conversations and mutual respect by incorporating formal elements that showed the benefits of this unpopular approach and implicitly instruct viewers on how to participate in it. In terms of peer content, these illustrations show two individuals moving away from dogmatic confrontation by reflecting on their own views and then initiating more considerate discussion. In each phase, the people form a punctuation mark, an exclamation point, a question mark, and an ellipsis. This argues that the way we speak, whether we're being aggressive or more respectful, can be more important than the actual content of our positions when it comes to understanding and persuading those initially opposed to us. Each illustration consists of layered images. I incorporated the punctuation mark into each illustration many times to ensure that the mark the people are meant to represent is not misunderstood by a viewer. I also wanted to make these illustrations more visually complex, pushing back against the more minimalist aesthetics that dominate political campaigns and protest signs, and reinforcing my message that the public sphere should become more nuanced and less stark and dogmatic. Now I'll talk about each piece more in depth. The exclamation point represents our societal starting point, where political stances are straight and rigid. I formed the exclamation points by drawing each person holding a sign representing their political position above their head, showing how, with the current status quo, ideology too often overwhelms individual identities. This illustration also has less visual elements than the other two, showing the conversational poverty that results from clinging too tightly to a single ideology. The question mark illustration is perhaps the most significant. It argues for a willingness to critically examine one's own positions, an important precursor to civil conversations that many overlook. I transformed the people into question marks by having them bend down to examine their sign, now held close to the ground. This lowers the sign, and therefore the person's political stance, from its previously exalted position, bringing it down to earth where it can be fairly criticized. I also remove any ambiguity about what the object of questioning is by showing each individual looking at their own sign, rather than critiquing the other's position, something that is certainly important but far more common today. Another nuance to the people's position is that in bending down to reflect on themselves, they also appear to be bowing to each other. This shows the mutual respect that results from acknowledging that their position may have flaws and the others may have strengths. Finally, I added spirals to this image to reinforce the idea of deeply investigating one's own stance and then emerging with a willingness to engage with the others. The bottom spiral says, what is it in your own position that gives you trouble? What is it in the position of the other that you are attracted to? This is a quote from pro-dialogue advocate Francis Kissling, one of my inspirations for this piece and a valuable guide for people reflecting on their own political ideas. The final illustration shows an ellipsis, which advocates more considerate conversations with the political other. Ellipses are commonly used when speakers hesitate, showing that these discussions should resist the fast pace and certainty of most contemporary political discourse in favor of pausing to reconsider one's words and give the other a chance to speak. The ellipsis is formed from the two people's heads in the speech bubble representing their conversation, elevating individual identity and the exchange of ideas to primary importance. The people now form a single ellipsis rather than two distinct punctuation marks, showing that they have entered a common space where discussion and mutual understanding is possible. But this piece does not advocate for centrism or agreement. I decided to keep the signs in view and maintain the Democratic blue and Republican red colors of the figures to emphasize that critically examining one's own stance and conversing with the other does not automatically require abandoning one's own ideas. I am aware, however, that this series could be paradoxically read as advocating for an uncompromising position itself, that civil conversations are important and dogmatic confrontation should always be avoided. There are certainly important nuances to my position that I failed to incorporate in this piece, such as the problems with demanding civility from people who have been oppressed and are justifiably furious. I could have better captured the entirety of my stance and avoided this contradiction with a more complex and long-form piece, but this likely would have restricted the audience of the work to those who are already inclined to engage with ambiguity and nuance. I chose the medium of illustration because I wanted to reach those who are used to interacting with shorter visual works, the people whose behaviors I want to change. Ultimately, I do think that this series succeeds in pushing back against the current state of American political discourse. It encourages citizens to reconsider their approach to ideological debates by reminding them that another way is possible.